Today I'm going to give you some of my tips and tricks that I use to get more depth and definition out of my tooling. That's coming up. Hello everyone, my name's Daniel Reach. This is Weaver Leather Supply. Today we're going to be taking a look at two different things. First of all, I'm going to work my way through a sunflower design, and I'm intentionally only going to do kind of an average job on it. The reason I want to do that is because I want to be able to go back and show you what I would do if I were trying to ramp up the definition and the depth on that design. So that's kind of the goal here. We're going to do a sunflower design, and we're going to go back and ramp it up and really show you how to get more depth and definition out of it. So let's put 15 minutes on the clock. I have no idea if I can hit that 15-minute timer, but I thought it'd be fun. So let's jump in. So the first thing that you need to know is that this video is primarily about the second half of it, how to get more depth and definition out of your project. Now that being said, I know some of you out there are going to want to work through this sunflower design with me. So I'm not just going to go straight to the end and not show you how we did it. We're going to do each individual step, but we're going to move through them pretty quick. There's not really going to be a lot of teaching in the first half of it. We've done videos on all the different steps, at least most of them. So we'll put links to all of those in the description box below. But this video is primarily about that second half and how we would go about adding additional depth and definition to the sunflower. So as always, the first thing we're going to do are the prep steps. We're going to case our leather. That just means add moisture to the leather. We're going to set our wing dividers to a 1/2 inch and mark the tooling window all the way around. All of our tooling is going to stay inside this window. Then I can trace the pattern onto the tracing film, and then I can transfer it to the leather. So once we got the prep steps done, we can start cutting into the design. And to do that, I'm going to start with that border that goes all the way around the outside. Now I say this in every video when we talk about cutting in a design like this. When you're running long lines, the movement comes from your arm and your shoulder and your elbow. And by that I mean we're pulling the line, we're not chopping the line. So next up is beveling, and you got a couple of options here. You can go with a traditional bevel, that's what comes in most of the kits, or you can do what I'm going to be doing, and that's use a steep bevel. It does a really good job at giving me a crisp edge and beveling that leather back away so we get some good definition and depth in there. So I'm going to be using a steep bevel. So next we're going to be using something called a leaf liner, and I've heard a couple of people say they have a hard time remembering which way it should face. Now if you're not familiar with a leaf liner, first we'll put a picture right up here so you can see the stamp that it makes. And as you look at that, notice that it looks like an arrowhead that's had the top of it cut off. If you were to fire an arrow, the point always goes first, and that's what we want to do with this. So what you want to do is you want to snug that leaf liner right up against the stem of the leaf, and make sure that if it had a point, that point leads the way. If you do that, it will always be oriented correctly. So next up is the center shader, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this and butt it right up against the center of that sunflower. This is what's going to give us the definition, the depth, and the shading right around the center of that flower. Now if you're not sure about how to use it or what it looks like, we just did a video on that maybe a couple of weeks ago. So we'll put a link in the description so it's really easy to find. Go back and check that out. We go into a lot of detail about how to make a center shader work to get the effect you're looking for. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to put the concave end of the tool right up against that center flower. Then I'm going to work one petal at a time. Once we're happy with the flower center, we can start adding some shading to the petals. I'm going to use a lined pear shader. It's a little bit different than a traditional pear shader in that it looks like it's been stretched and it's lined instead of checkered. The trick to using it is to make sure that the lines are always oriented the same way. Basically, we don't want to keep changing angles with it, otherwise it'll throw off the flow of the shadows. Then we're going to grab our petal lifter and lift the inside curve of all those petals. We want to add a little bit of depth to them. Going to grab my veiner now. This is a smooth one. We're going to add a little bit of depth and definition to the center of those leaves. So this is a seeder tool. It's super simple to use. The trick is just make sure that the seeds don't overlap. You want them to butt right up against each other, but you don't want them to overlap. So that's the base project done. We've got a nice looking sunflower, but we want to kind of ramp it up a few steps. So I'm going to show you a few tricks. The first thing I'll say is that the ones I'm about to show you could easily replace the steps I just showed you, or you could use them after you're done if you think it needs more depth and definition. You can either use them as a replacement or you can use them to enhance the project. Either one is up to you. First up is going to be adding some definition to the edges. You can use an extra steep bevel, a small steep bevel, whatever you want to use. Basically, the idea here is to drive the force of the tap straight down so we create a nice crisp edge. So I want to mention real quick, I am not saying this is the only way to get better depth and definition out of your tooling. I'm just saying these are a couple of techniques that you can use that will help you get better results. I know there's some leather crafters out there who are going to disagree with what I'm about to say, and that's totally fine. But I wanted to kind of share my thoughts on bevels because I look at them very differently than a lot of the leather crafters out there do. I come from an art background. I think of my bevels kind of like a paintbrush. Some paintbrushes are good at doing one thing while they're not so good at doing something else, and there's another brush that's amazing at doing that. And bevels are kind of the same way. Some bevels are great at beveling and creating texture. Other bevels are great at creating nice, crisp lines. So I tend to bevel my projects multiple times, and each time I bevel it, I'm trying to add a different technique and texture to the project. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a video on how I use those bevels. We can do an entire video just on that, and I can show you what an amazing difference it can make when you use your bevels, kind of like paintbrushes, each of them doing something different. Once we're happy with the definition, we can start working on the shading. Now typically, I would either use a Pear shader or a thumbprint, not both. But for this project, I wanted you to be able to see the difference between the two. Now, both are great tools. Don't feel like one is better than the other. They just create different effects. So what's the difference between a thumbprint and a pear shader? Well, essentially it's the bottom of the stamp. A pear shader is rounded on the bottom. A thumbprint is flat. And because it's flat, you're going to get more compression out of a thumbprint than you will out of a pear shader. Now that doesn't mean it's better, it just means it creates a different effect. Something that I want to point out to you is how I'm pushing that thumbprint right up to the edge of the leaf, and I'm creating a line that goes all the way around, kind of creates a little border. That goes a long way in helping create depth and defining the edges of those leaves. So the next thing this project needs is a background. I could totally go in with a matting tool and just compress the leather around it. That would make that flower pop. But I want some texture back there, so I'm gonna go in with a background tool and add some texture behind the flower. So as you're working through the background, if you have multiple sizes of a background stamp, start with the largest one, work everything that'll fit in, and then drop down to the next size. Never try to make a stamp fit into an area that it doesn't want to fit in. So one of the big things that you're going to want to avoid is the bevel shadow. It's that dark line that shows up when you bevel something. And the way we can get rid of that is by going back over that shadow with our backgrounder, and it should blend right into the background. So now I'm going to grab that elongated pear shader that I was using before, and I'm going to use the pointy end of it to add a little bit more definition to the petals. We want to make it look like there's a little bit of a fold there. And of course, we need some decorative cuts. Now, decorative cuts could be their own video just on their own. So for now, I'll just give you 3 pointers. 1, they should always have a curve to them. 2, they should always taper. And 3, each group of cuts should always pull to a center point. So hopefully you can see that a few extra well-placed steps can make a really big difference in the depth and definition of your project. Now, one thing you might be wondering is, why didn't I add some color, some antique to it like that, so that those cuts and that definition would pop? Well, in the next video, I'm going to show you how to create an aged copper patina on this project. But that's for the next video. In the meantime, go make something amazing.